Live on YouTube.
Oh, yeah?
Let's see how that works.
No cussing in there.
Yeah, try to be positive tonight.
Okay. Hi.
Well, they've got a deal next week.
Get closer.
Oh, shit. Tell me why that they wanted to record it and I talked to me about it. Told them I was playing with the live streaming. It might be ready, but they wouldn't. Well, they got all excited and everybody's playing on it. So I guess I better see if I figured it out. But Jody claims that if it's on there, she'll watch it while she's on vacation.
No,
We know that's a lie,
I will
but
change my mind.
I did this just for you.
I will watch it when I get back though. I will watch it at work Monday when I'm falling asleep and don't want to be there because I hate the job. I have debated whether I'm going to take my book with me or not. I can read it on the beach, right?
Well, if this works tonight, it's what I'm gonna do for now.
See that other one?
All right, see? Oh, boy, your seat would have been wet.
Yeah, if we had extra nasty smoothie too, that would have made it all kinds of nasty.
Appears to be working.
I'm finding one that's not so sweet. Thank goodness. These things, if you need energy, forget the Red Bull. These little. What is it? It's called Bang. They'll have you bouncing off the walls and everything.
Well, that's what I want to do, bounce off the wall.
They're carbon free, sugar free, fat free, calorie free.
I do that anyway.
Yeah, maybe it's a
My
generation
friend that's
thing,
been
I
on a
don't
keto
know.
diet for like a year. He's the one that told me about one. And I was like, well, he lives in Dallas. And I'm like, I didn't think I could get those here. And I've been looking for them. And somebody just happened to make a
No,
post
so
about one
that's
about a month ago. Look what I found. These are cool. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Oh,
And they're going right down in
Oh, is
this
that right?
corner. This little
So we're all here.
What about
He hasn't called, but I don't know whether, I don't know how his scan came out today, so I don't know whether he'll be here or not.
must have gotten hurt worse than he thought, huh?
He sure didn't sound good when he talked to me on the phone.
Really? Wow.
What happened?
He got, Brett got into a motorcycle wreck. He was riding out some trails and a lion caught him right in his neckline. It was like an old, he said it was old wooden fence posts and he didn't think there was a line that was across them. So, you know, he just started riding right through it, man, and it caught him right on his neck bone, on his collarbone and across his neck. And it was an old rusty line, like metal wire that caught him to the neck. And he said that if it wasn't for his collarbone, it would have decapitated him. It was pretty nasty in his neck.
Oh, that's
But he looked like he was healing up already. But I mean, he said that he kept like googling stuff online because he sort of was feeling something weird in his body or whatever. I don't know.
tetanus booster?
Are you laughing?
Yeah.
You laughing at the poor guy?
He did take a shot.
Him talking about Googling stuff. Those are the
Yeah, that's what he said. He was like, man, he's like, I Google stuff and I see these symptoms and I think that I've got all these different, you know, these different ailments now, you know.
Yeah, Dr. Google creates more illness.
No doubt.
All right, let's get started.
Rock and
Because I
roll.
want to cover the rest of this chapter, and the next chapter is short, so I think we can get through that tonight as well,
Great.
which will put us a chapter ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
And we're experimenting with live casting this to YouTube tonight, so we'll see how that works.
Oh man, you're like fully in it now.
Oh man,
Full live stream.
we're high class.
Is anybody watching it live on YouTube?
Nobody knows it's out there except you guys, so. And,
But it automatically records it when you live stream it, so that's kind of cool. You already have it recording for you. It'll be right there first to access. What's your YouTube channel?
well, actually, I think if you just get in there and search Larry Starbuck, it ought to pop up.
All right.
I doubt that there's too many Larry Starbucks out there posting stuff, so.
I'm gonna have Julia accept my phone call on Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm gonna tell you guys all hi from the beach. We can see it.
Make us jealous, huh?
And I'm gonna ask, are you watching that video? I mean, that's why I did this.
Yeah, it says you're live right now, man. I see it.
Now, please, don't take advantage of me on this. Come to class.
Right.
Watching it live stream is a good backup if you were in trouble or can't be here, but I'm not gonna watch that screen for you to type in your questions. Plus, I'm not licensed as a distance learning course, so.
Okay.
And I don't really have a desire to be shut down right now, even though, I say that facetiously every time I'm up there, and somebody named Dana is watching.
Hi, Dana.
Hi Dana, how are you? Whoever you
There's a
are.
Dylan Nowak too on here.
Was it Dylan?
Yeah, Dylan. Looks like Dylan Nowak.
Well, I glanced there and thought it said Dana, it's
Yeah.
Dylan.
Dylan Nowak.
So, hi Dylan.
Oh, it's this Dylan, dude. Snap, man. I didn't even think about that. This is awesome. We can oh man, this is so cool.
I did that to one of our owners in another company I was in once. He was real thrilled with Facebook, and he was showing everybody how to do it, and it showed them how to message to people, and I just opened it up on my phone, and I was making snide remarks behind him on the screen while he was upstaging him while he was making his Facebook presentation. This, I guess, just publishes to the YouTube screen when you chat in.
Right.
Well, I'm getting past my mental block on it. That's what I'm trying to do.
Good.
You know, that's the big thing. That really is a big thing in anything, but in technology especially, getting past that mental block that says. And no, I didn't do well last night. For anybody who wasn't here.
How many times you wake up?
They came in and woke me up.
So, sir, you haven't been breathing for 2 minutes, sir.
And unhooked me and sent me home.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
So this is for a CPAP machine?
Yeah, but they said they didn't think I needed CPAP. So.
Oh no? Oh, well, that means you slept good. Then you're fine.
No.
No.
Then what do you need?
Probably counseling. My heart rate was out of sight, and I was dreaming that I was in the jungle fighting a war.
Wow.
But I've been there enough times throughout the years that anymore I'm friends with it now. So used to undoing me, but not anymore. That's the way that works.
What
Wow.
about Ambien or
Hmm?
PTSD medication or something
Thank you,
to
Libby.
help you sleep?
I did make the mistake at VA once when they asked me if I ever felt suicidal.
Mhm.
I said, I'm not the problem. I was there an extra hour for that remark, but convinced me that I was just kidding. But I've never taken medication. I never thought it bothered me. Oh well.
My wife and I spent 4 hours at the VA this morning to have a 30-second conversation with someone.
That's not bad. That's pretty good for the VA. Should have told him you had chest pains. That usually shortens about a couple hours anyway. All right, preparation of the closing statement. We talked about the closing process. Now we're going to talk about the preparation of the closing statement. It's not a big deal for you, but you need to be familiar with it because you're not going to be tested over it because you're never going to prepare it. Title company does that. But if you understand the process of the preparation, it can help you when you are looking at one as far as making sure everything's in order.
So we're not gonna be tested on this?
Did they change it?
Well, you will be tested, I said that and then the first slide that pops up, you will be tested over this right
Okay.
here.
I was like, cause this tripped up a lot of people when I went
Yes.
to school before, the debit and the credit thing, and I
Yeah.
remember having questions on my test, so when you said
Now-
that about me, they changed it.
Now, when you went to school before, everything was on HUD one, right?
I went in 2015.
Yeah, so everything was still on, the schools were all still teaching HUD one anyway, that changed in, 15, but, to the new closing statement. But the debit and credit principle is still the same. Debit is a charge, credit is a credit.
Yeah, it's like if you're thinking
Now
about.
entered in the person's favor. Now what throws you with debits and credits in real estate is that every time one side is debited, the other side is credited.
Mhm.
But it's not always evident where the credit and the debit takes place. Because, and some of the debits and credits are confusing. Because the mortgage is a credit to the buyer. Does that make sense?
Right, because it's coming up.
Because they owe the total of purchase price. So it's added in there as a credit to the buyer, because after it's all figured, the number at the bottom of the page is what the buyer needs to bring to closing. So the new mortgage, their earnest money, all gets credited back to them. And then, and then it's all debited at the end as it's paid to the seller and becomes a credit to the seller. So see, it can get confusing.
It seems backwards until you.
It does, on a lot of it, it seems backwards.
Yeah, you were saying that and I was reading this, then I got mixed up while you were talking about it.
Well,
Because I think people get mixed up with debit deposit, like that sounds the same in a way too.
You got-
Right,
on the buyer's side,
yeah.
you've got a purchase price of $100,000. Okay? That's where we're starting, because is this a credit or a debit?
Debit.
That's a debit to the buyer.
Okay.
Alright? We got $1,000 earnest money. Now, we got $1,000 earnest money that the buyer already put down. Credit or debit?
Debit. Still debit.
It's 50-50, so if somebody gives the wrong answer, the rest of you can just chime in with the right. That's a credit,
How is that a credit?
because they've already paid it.
Oh, okay.
See, it's already on deposit.
Oh.
So this is what we're working from, is what they owe for the property. So they've already put $1,000 down.
So that's already in the buyer or in the seller's hands. So that means
No,
a
it's
credit.
not, I mean, yes, and no,
Technically,
it's
yeah.
in the escrow.
Okay, but as long as it's already been put down on the table, basically.
It
it's
becomes a credit because they
Gotcha.
paid it,
Yeah.
right?
So if it's
We've
empty,
got
it's
80, I'm gonna make this easy for us. We got an $84,000 new loan. Credit or debit to the buyer.
empty.
Credit, I mean.
See, if I pause, you know you got the wrong answer.
No, you just said that, but I was just.
It's a credit because someone else is paying 84,000 of the 100,000 that's gonna be debited from the buyer. See why it gets confusing?
Why?
There's,
And you're of course looking at a story question
yeah,
when you do this, so you've got to think in terms of how we're doing, okay? So now we've got, and then,
So it's still the original amount owed is the only debit
So-
possible?
no,
Okay.
so now we've got $85,000 in credit, taken away from the 100,000 in debit, but it's actually added to the debit because it's positive, and this is a negative, and you've got $15,000
So,
that's a debit from the seller. So if they've got to bring 15, now there's more categories here, of course, but they got to bring $15,000 to closing.
the seller does. And that's a debit to the seller because they haven't brought it to the table yet.
Correct.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Brian, you still look,
Yeah, I'm.
You're following?
Can you
Okay.
explain to me the 84 one more time? Can
Huh?
you explain to me why the 84 is a credit? Because you said that there's
because
another loan
it's a new loan,
that, Okay.
that the borrower is getting, but that money is coming from the loan, it's not coming from the buyer.
original buyer,
Oh.
okay.
See, so they're gonna get credit for that new loan.
Okay, okay.
Now, this $15,000 debit from the buyer is is gonna be transferred over to the seller
Mhm.
as credit, right? Okay, now,
Yeah.
so we got 15,000 over here, we're on the seller now. So this debit becomes a credit to the seller,
Right,
but the seller gotta pay $600 for abstracting, debit or credit?
Yeah.
debit.
Debit.
Yeah.
They agreed to pay. Now, I'm simplifying this, understand that, but I can do that because depending on the loan package will determine how the closing company has to write it up. Sometimes they'll put, seller concessions up here as credits to the buyer, but even if they, and if, I should have put what I'm fixing to put here, up here too. So they're paying $5,000 of the buyer's closing costs. Debit or credit to the seller?
Still
Yeah.
Definitely a debit.
Yeah.
But this then should also be what?
The credit once it's done.
A credit up here to the buyer, because when you get the total list of expenses, it also has their closing costs, their escrow, so on and so forth. So then, we've got 5,600 coming off of 15,000, which is going to leave us with what, $9,400? That's gonna be a credit, but this is gonna be the money due to the seller,
Mm.
okay?
Yeah.
I think there's probably an example in your book. If there's not, there should have been.
276.
276, which, if you kind of look at that with that in mind, it's on 276, you said?
Mhm.
Yeah, that figure,
Oh, I'm in the wrong check.
17.3 is wrong up there.
Well, that probably didn't get changed, yeah, this used to be chapter 17,
Yeah.
and,
And now it's 14.4.
yeah. So you got your borrower side, your seller side. Now, this is showing the new closing statement, not the old HUD one. The old HUD one I thought was easier to read, but it may only be because that's what I learned on. And I had to relearn this one. But you have, you still have the same concept. You got a borrower side and a seller side. And I was looking for, well, okay, I see one that we're gonna use here. Property taxes. I just spent about an hour explaining this to a friend today because they're selling their house and he wanted to know why he's having to pay the buyer's property taxes. Well, I said, you're not. I said, we pay property taxes in arrears. He said, I'm tired of hearing that word, what's it mean? I said, well, it means we pay after the fact.
Get you
You know, so, yeah, so when you paid your property taxes in December, January of 18, you were paying 17's property taxes, not 18's. So if you sell your house, end of September, then you have 9 months that you've used the property and the taxes are yours. But the state doesn't break it up. They're only going, at the end of the year, they're going to file or send out a property tax bill against the property to whoever owns it at the time. So at closing, we will debit from the seller's proceeds, 9 months worth of property taxes. We'll credit it to the buyer, which in turn will, we're going to set up full escrow so that they can pay the property taxes at the end of the year, because at the end of the year, the buyer's going to pay the full year's property taxes, even though they only were in the property 3 months of 18. That's where credits and debits come into play for us. Is it making sense?
Mm-hmm.
It can be, and on the questions, it gets real confusing because you've got to stop and think, And and that's one reason I like to use the loan example, because, we think in terms, your mind wants to think in terms of the fact that the new loan, that money's all going to the seller, or be a credit to the seller. No. The seller gets all their money from the buyer. And any money that's received, whether it's through a gift letter or through a new loan or whatever, the buyer, it all gets listed as a credit to the buyer, as it's eventually shows how much they need to bring cash money. Clear as mud? Good. Since nobody's asking questions, I'm moving on. When we do some prorations and some, math practice here in a couple of weeks, I'll come back and try to, when we do those, I'll try to relate them back to a real life scenario so that you can see why they come into play. And on some of these, I'll try to pick up some real, that is a picture of a real one in your book, but sometimes having the actual form in your hand means more than a picture of it. All right, the buyer's debits and credits are totaled. And when all of them have been calculated and figured, we get down to the bottom of the page. It tells us how much the buyer brings to the table. That actually constitutes a debit. And then it tells how much the seller is going to receive, which is a credit. Mm-hmm. You will have some transactions that are negative on the seller side, for whatever reason. During 09 and 10, we had a lot of them that sellers were having to bring bunches of money to the table to get out of their properties. And right now it's not so common, but there's always those scenarios that exist because people get behind the eight ball. It's just that simple. I've been so far behind the eight ball before I couldn't see the pot. If there indeed was one. So the debits and credits are totaled. This says what I just said. When the debits are subtracted from the credits, the difference is the amount the seller will receive at closing. But you have two boxes at the bottom of the statement, and one says buyer brings this cash buyer needs to bring to closing. Of course, they're not going to accept cash, not be a certified check, and they'd rather have it wired now. And then on the other side, it's going to say, it's in there, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I read that. At work yesterday, I went through line by line, just reading it, trying to familiarize myself with it.
I think, really, as far as that closing document is concerned for this exam, the understanding of the credits and debits is probably the most important part. We will talk about prorating property taxes and such as that. The big thing you have to remember in their math questions on property taxes is watch carefully, because they will tell you how the property taxes are being collected. It will either say property taxes collected in advance or in arrears. So I don't know why they can't say after the fact or something of that nature, but I guess arrears is more fun to say anyway. So, expenses. What's the most important thing to look at on the closing statement? Your commission. Yeah. Because it's the most important thing on there. And the easiest to figure. There'll be some attorney's fees on there, recording expenses, transfer taxes. How much are transfer taxes? In the state of Oklahoma? We don't even call them transfer taxes in Oklahoma. What do we call them in Oklahoma?
Stamps.
Dock stamps. And they are?
$500 per something.
Well, there's a 500 in there.
That's 50 cents per 500?
Oh, there's no 50 cents in there. That was mine.
75 cents.
There you go. 75 cents per every part
50
of
cents was your
500.
example on the test, that's what it
50
was.
cents is one of the questions in the question bank. Don't correct the question, answer it.
How do you remember all that stuff, man? It's crazy. That's wild.
She's already been licensed once before.
Yeah.
So, different state, but did you ever have your Oklahoma license? I was thinking it was just Arizona.
Arizona.
Title expenses, loan fees, your tax and insurance escrows, which can be called reserves, escrows, or impound accounts. Just plant that in your subliminal somewhere, so when you're reading the question, you know that's all the same thing. Appraisal fees, survey fees, additional fees, fees on fees, tax on tax. By the way, Oklahoma's a fee state, because in our Constitution, before they raise taxes, or institute new taxes rather, it requires a vote of the people. So the politicians figured out a long time ago not to go after new taxes, they just assess fees on us. And we're feed to death in Oklahoma, because they can do that without a vote of the people. So, and a fee is simply that something that's charged for the implementation of something that the people have already approved. All you gotta do is show that we need to charge this fee in order to do what we already do for less money. So, that was awful cynical, wasn't it? True, but cynical. Prorations. Boy, I must have been asleep when I changed these slides. I didn't change those 17s to 14s. Everybody pays for what they use. So the seller pays for the part they use, buyer pays for the part they use. Property taxes, of course, the easiest example, because you pay the taxes on the property when you're in it. Homeowners Association, the same way. If it's investment property, and the contract does cover this, if it's investment property, we prorate the rents because of time ownership. Now, as far as prorations are concerned, in Oklahoma anyway, and most states, the day of closing is charged against the seller. Seller pays up to and through. Now, the phrase we use in the industry is up to and through. The phrase that's used on your test is through. So, watch the questions. They will define. But I don't know of any questions on prorations that do not assess the day of closing to the seller. General rules for prorating. Boy, it looks like I'm going to do it all night. There's the slide I just read to you. Well, I didn't actually read it word for word. Most states, the seller owns the property on the day of closing, and prorations are made to and including that date. Accrued real estate taxes are usually prorated. Special assessments for public improvements are not. In other words, accrued means already used or already paid, excuse me, not used, already paid. I really don't understand why they're saying this here, because in Oklahoma, special assessments we prorate, but they're saying that special assessments are not prorated, but in Oklahoma they are. Rents are usually prorated based on the actual number of days. When's the best time if you sell an investment property that's got renters in it? When's the best day to sell it? Close on it.
Last day of the month.
Last day of the month. Then you don't have to prorate rent. What basis do we use to prorate security deposits?
You don't.
You don't, because they don't belong to the seller, they belong to the tenant. So they are transferred over. Yes, you are gonna have investors who are gonna try to keep those security deposits claiming they're theirs, and, that the buyer has no right to them. No, they're not theirs, and they're also not the buyer. They belong to the tenants.
Right.
And they are supposed to be in a separate account. Real estate taxes, if they're paid in advance, seller should be reimbursed for the portion of the year remaining after the buyer takes ownership. Tell you, it's gonna be one of those nights. I've already covered this, and now we get to the slide. Actually, I did it on purpose, so that this would be like a review. You gonna buy that? Yeah. Is that what your dad always did when he made mistakes? Said, I did that to see if you pay attention. I like that other meme on Facebook. Says, did you ever question your dad? He said, yeah, I did that once when I was 13. He said, how did it work out? I said, well, I don't know. I was 16 when I woke up. And of course, if they're paid in arrears, the buyer's credited for the time the seller was occupying the property. We will cover number 3. We'll talk about it again when we do some math practices. But mortgage loan interest is usually paid in arrears. However, on the closing statement, it's going to be listed as prepaid interest. Well, the reason it's prepaid interest is because HUD requires a full 30 days from closing before the first payment. So if you close on the 15th of the month, how many days is it before your first payment?
Very good.
45.
45.
Because the payments are all due on the first of the month. It has to be a full 30 days. So when's the best time to close?
The 10th.
First week of the month. If you, but we're still going to collect for interest on those days that will have drawn interest before you actually make a payment. Otherwise, your first payment would be offset by 15 days interest in the illustration I just gave you. So, accrued items equal buyer credit. Because sellers already used that portion, and prepaid items equal seller's credit.
So accrued means already paid?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, seller's already paid,
Already used.
already used. I said that wrong twice in a row, didn't I?
Yeah.
Already used, seller's already used this 9 months of taxes, so we're gonna credit the buyer for it.
Okay.
The arithmetic of prorating, 4 considerations. The nature of the item being prorated. Now think back to when we talked about this in the previous lesson. We got 2 calendars that can be used. Statutory and actual. Actual calendar has how many days in the year?
365.
365. A statutory calendar has how many days?
360.
360. 12 months in both of them, but in a statutory calendar, every month has 30 days, including February. In a actual calendar, it's 30, 31, February is 28, 29. So in your calculations, you got to look to see, the nature of the item. Taxes generally, and although on your test they are not, all your questions on the test tell you to use a statutory year on the taxes. However, in the real world, we figure them on actual days of calendar year. Mortgages generally are interest generally figured on a statutory basis, but on your exam, it's they use actual days. Now, there's a reason, I'm sure, that they do that, and I think the reason is see if you're paying attention and read your questions. However, I've told you, haven't I, that on all math questions, all possible answers will be on the page. You know,
So you're not gonna get some crazy figure out of your own head.
so if your answer is not on the page, it's probably the wrong answer. And, but just because your answer is on the page, doesn't mean it's the right answer.
But I know at least one.
Because there are, you know, I mean, in putting those questions together, the committee did calculate, the possible approaches people might take to it. So you're gonna have to know the approach to it, but we're gonna cover it. You got to determine whether it's accrued or prepaid, and what arithmetic process is gonna be used. And by the way, we never use Common Core math in real estate, so, yeah. We do estimate from time to time, and there's your, I got ahead of myself again, your bank and your statutory year.
Listen.
You know, the ironic part of it is that there will never be over a 1 or 2% difference, regardless of which way you do the math on these. It's I think that's to me that fascinating that it's that close. But it's like daylight savings time. Always ask why. Why not just use one method for everything? But bankers want to be difficult.
Arizona doesn't have daylight savings time.
I'm sorry.
Arizona doesn't have daylight savings
Yes,
time.
true.
Awesome. I think they should go around with a petition like they did this whole marijuana thing, and let's get rid of this stupid daylight savings time. I thought they did, didn't they?
We actually got rid of daylight savings time once in my life, and it didn't last very long.
Not all of us are farmers that need to get up when the crow starts, or the rooster starts.
The farmers, very few of them support daylight savings time. I've had farmers, dairy farmers tell me before, my cows come in the same time every day. Doesn't matter what the clock says. So most farmers don't necessarily support it, and I never really understood I guess it's more one of those things to the lowest common denominator. In other words, the laziest people who aren't willing to adjust and say, okay, I'm supposed to get up at 6 o'clock every day. It doesn't matter what the sun's doing. And of course, the yearly calendar's actual day is 365.
Hank coming home at 5:20, it'd be dark.
And real estate, I don't like the dark evenings because we're showing houses out here in the dark, which is not just a safety issue. It is a safety issue, but it's also difficult to look at this house because it's dark.
Sometimes they were home.
So yeah, sometimes the best time to sell some houses too. But I got a call from the police one night asking if I was working with a certain family. I was. I said, why do you ask? They said, well, they're over here looking at a house. And I said, oh. I said, yeah, they found the back door vacant. They found the back door unlocked, but the electricity's not on. So they were going through the house looking at it with a flashlight.
Oh my gosh.
I said, well, they've been warned not to do that, but I'll come over and vouch for them. And I did. But yeah, you're gonna never be to the point that you're in this business that you're gonna say you've seen it all. All right, real estate taxes and other liens. How many in the class like to pay taxes?
Very in method.
I'm exhausted, just leave me alone.
Just for that, you have to watch those videos.
I'm
while
gonna
you're on
watch the
vacation.
stinking videos, because I need as much of this as I can get, so that I don't fail this test.
A lien is the charge or claim against property made to enforce the payment of money. Now, we talked about encumbrances already when we talked about easements, and I already gave you the little line, all liens are encumbrances, but not all encumbrances are liens. But liens are definitely encumbrances. Because if somebody else owes money on the property, do you want to accept it without that being paid off?
Unless you don't know how much it costs.
Now, if you accept, well, let me back up, that's not how I meant to ask the question. Is it possible to close on a piece of real estate and leave the lien in place?
Yes, if the buyer accepts the debt.
Yeah, that's called an assumption.
Unless it's federal tax, right?
Well, you can even assume the tax debt.
Really?
In fact, if you decide to be an investor, you're gonna buy some properties that are being sold by REOs that they're not gonna pay the taxes, they're not gonna pay any back bills against it. You're gonna take the whole thing. Now, the lien you're not gonna take, because, that's how they ended up with the property, but they're, gonna say you pay everything. That's called as is. There is no such animal as is, because certain laws require expenses to be paid, and certain things are required, so, try not to let people list their houses as is. It's a ridiculous statement anyway. As I always ask them when they tell me they want to list as is, I say, well, you mean if all it took was $100 worth of repairs to get a full price offered, you'd say no? Well, no, if it only took $100. Let's deal with them as they come in. Let's don't rule out anything and limit our buyer pool by telling people we're not willing to negotiate, which is what you do when you say as is. But it's not as is anyway. You're going to prorate the taxes. It's HUD does not accept that term. Types of liens. How many of you feel like this might be reviewed? It's all right, you need it. Plus it proves what I've been telling you, this stuff. The principles are very close to the same, even on the same subject matter. So what's a voluntary lien? An example of a voluntary lien. Mortgage. Involuntary lien. Taxes. Those are your most common voluntary, most common involuntary. Statutory or equitable. What's a statutory lien?
Created by statute.
Created by statute. The law says this. Actually, a tax lien would be a statutory lien. What's an equitable lien? Created because you owe the money, or you have the money in it. Mortgage lien would be an equitable lien. And there's general and specific. What's a general lien? That's what we put on the generals.
Judgment, estates,
The colonels and the enlisted have different liens.
Really?
No,
I'm about to say, what?
that's a facetious remark.
My bad.
General lien is attached to everything you own. What's the most common general lien?
IRS tax.
Tax lien. IRS tax lien. Specific lien is attached only to certain properties. And that would be what kind of lien? For example,
Like a mechanics lien?
or something?
mechanics lien or a mortgage.
Real estate tax lien.
Or something.
So a lien attaches to real property the moment it is filed. A lien does not attach to personal property until that property is seized. That's why some states, when it comes to vehicles and such, are title theory states, because they've got the title already to it, rather than just a lien that they have to seize the property first before it's any good. General liens affect all property owned by the debtor, both real and personal. Judgment liens, state tax or inheritance tax, The debts of the dissident. Yep, even after you die, you gotta pay your debts. But only to the extent of money that you have. Corporate franchise tax liens, and then the one we all love, the irreverent service tax liens. The idiots, I'm trying to think of an R right quick.
Receiving
Idiotic retard service.
idiotic return.
Nobody likes the tax collector. I have no desire to be one. Specific liens affect only one identified property and affect only that particular property. Bear in mind that tax liens, for the most part, are general liens. Uncle Sam's gonna get paid. If there's anything there, Uncle's gonna get it. The philosophy behind that is good, and that is it's public money. And when we don't pay our taxes, we're stealing from one another. But the waste is what causes us to despise it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind paying taxes for the purpose of paving roads and having nice schools and public services and whatnot. I just don't like when the money's wasted.
Golden toilets.
Yeah. Well, the real estate commission is a volunteer position. The only thing they get as reimbursement is travel expenses. So once a year they have I think it's a 4-day planning meeting. Last year I believe it was in Alaska. The year before it was in Hawaii. You know, they do real good on their expenses. They do have to pay for their spouses. Ad valorem taxes. If you don't pay your property taxes, what kind of lien's going to be? Are you going to end up with?
Tax lien?
It's going to be an involuntary specific,
Oh, okay.
because it's against the property.
Right.
Special assessment liens. These could be either voluntary or involuntary, depending on why they were put in play. Gated communities. A lot of people are not aware of this, but in a gated community, the homeowners pay for the streets, the curbs, the guttering, the water mains, everything. City doesn't pay for anything. But occasionally, you will have a gated community that needs new infrastructure, but they don't have the funds. City will agree to pay it, but they assess a special assessment against the properties for that purpose. In that case, it's voluntary. But for the most part, they're tax liens, they're involuntary. And, but they could be either specific or general liens. Income tax liens are always general liens. Sales tax liens are always general liens. Mortgage liens, that's on your mortgage. Trust deed liens, same thing as a mortgage lien.
Well, how does that work? What is a trustee lien, if you don't mind me asking?
Trust deed liens, that's if you got the property in a trust, but you have a mortgage on it with the trust.
Okay.
Because the trust is holding,
So the trust itself has a lien?
well, trusts do not own property.
Right. The person
They
is the
they
trustee.
manage property for
Yeah.
someone.
Or the
So,
trustee?
when you have a debt against a property that you have in trust, you have a trust deed.
Mm.
Mechanics liens, utility liens, those vary, by the way. And if you're selling a rural property that's on a rural water meter, boy, you better double check that one before you agree to the prices, because the water meter attaches to the property, not to the tenant in rural water districts. And if there's $3,000 owed against that water meter, and the seller doesn't pay it, and you close on it, you're not getting water unless you pay that $3,000 back bill. Remember what I told you, I don't make these stories up. I had to, not personally, but on a foreclosure that was in a rural water district. One of those where the REO company said, we're not paying anything, and the buyer, who was an investor, took it, but he didn't bother checking out the water meter. He looked in the hole and there was a meter there, so he said, we're in good shape. Well, no, turned out they weren't, because before closing, they came out and pulled that meter because they checked the books and they found out it was closing and said, we're going to pull that meter. Plus you buy those meters, rural water district. Bail bond liens. Anybody know what a bail bond lien is?
You know, you go to
Yeah, when
jail,
you
you
get
don't
in
pay
trouble.
it.
You're supposed to say yes, and then I get to ask you how you know. See, but
That's when they freeze all your stuff.
and a bail bond lien is a general lien. It attaches to everything you got, including the real estate. So if you didn't tell your spouse about that little incident and go sell the house and you never paid off that bond, you jump bail. Well, one thing, you're going to jail, but and vendor liens, same category as mechanic liens, but it has to do with materials as opposed to labor. Effects of a lien on the title. Some liens run with the land. That would be the water meter that I was just telling you about. Taxes to the property, not the property owner. They bind all successive owners unless the lien is paid and cleared. So once a lien is attached to a piece of real estate, it's got to be paid to get it off of there. Somebody has to pay it. Seller, buyer, somebody has to pay it, otherwise it stays on the property. Priority. Now, number one is the test question, by the way, because priority establishes the order in which claims against the property will be satisfied.
So you have to pay each one in order, succession, or it won't be.
Why is the first mortgage the first mortgage?
It's first file.
First one filed. And it's going to be the first one paid.
So they won't let you take one of the liens off that's ahead of schedule. You've actually got to pay it piece by piece by piece.
Oh no, you can satisfy a second before you do a first. In fact,
Well, what does that mean there?
It means that if in the event of a foreclosure or a default,
Right.
that the court is going to say, you're first, you're second.
Oh, in addition money back.
Yeah.
Okay, I see
And
what
if we
you're saying.
run out of money, at the point at which we run out of money means that who gets paid. In other words, unless there are subordination agreements in play, and most of the time there will be, somebody is going to get left with nothing. And
Only one that didn't have a subordination agreement.
so, and last time we talked about this, we were talking about finances. I pointed out that sometimes a second can be higher than a first. Depending on how old the first is.
That's when they subordinate. That makes sense now.
Tax liens always take priority.
Yeah.
Now, that one ought to just pop off the page at you, but sometimes people miss the question because of the way the question is worded. So read the question carefully. But tax liens always take priority. Tax liens will never be subordinated. The government's not going to agree to subordination. They know they got all the trump cards, you know. That has a new meaning now, doesn't it? We're talking about having all the trump cards. Real estate tax liens, general real estate or ad valorem taxes. There'll be a slide here in a minute that says this, but I'm going to say it in the head of the slide. Ad valorem means according to value. You remember that from Latin class, right? Yeah, me neither. And I took Latin. They're levied by a taxing body. As government power, could be the state, could be the county. Real estate taxes are all state taxes. However, because of the enabling acts, the state gives the power to the city to collect certain taxes. So and the county's the same way. States, counties, cities, whoops, went the wrong way, school districts, drainage districts, hospital districts, water districts, sanitary districts, parks, forest preserves, recreation districts. It's just all these districts, that's how we fund these things, is through the tax dollar. And they are levied according to the value of the property. They're specific, involuntary, and statutory. That's the test question. I just love it. I was real unpopular during the big teacher thing, recent teacher thing, because I said, well, how many of you voted against raising property taxes? Well, that's a different thing. Well, no, it isn't. Because you're wanting to an increase in the budget, and that means property taxes are going to go up. And instead, the foolish citizens of the state of Oklahoma said, no, let's change the whole system. Let's take the tobacco tax. Well, that'll encourage people to cross the state line and buy their cigarettes. Or quit. So, let's just tax production on those oil wells. Oh, well, that's a smart move, since how we're an oil and gas state. Why not just leave it in the socialistic concept where it's been for centuries?
I think a lot of people didn't understand that. I didn't know that. I wish I would have known that, because I would say, yeah, I'd pay more property taxes to help the schools. You know?
And well, of course, who I was talking to was realtor groups when they were barking about it, and I said, you know, it hasn't been a year and a half since we as realtors were all out there encouraging everybody to vote no on property tax increase.
Yeah.
So we've been a little hypocritical now if we're standing around saying we want to spend more money on education when we voted against raising more money for education. You know, the property tax is a socialistic concept. You know, I'm a financial conservative. I'm a capitalist, but you know, we've also got to remember that our tax concept is a socialistic concept.
Yeah, our hands are tied.
You know, if you're a property owner, we expect you to pay for people that don't own property. People who don't own property don't pay for education. Because it doesn't come out of sales tax. Only fair taxation in a capitalistic system is sales tax. Because it's user tax. But our ad valorem taxes are all on homeowners. Everybody says, we want schools as good as Texas. Well, then you're going to have property taxes as good as Texas. They're not the highest in the nation. They're just 48th. That's not bad, 48 out of 50. And the other two, Alaska's, I think, number one.
In the highest tax?
Yeah, the other two states are densely populated. So that's why their property taxes are high.
You don't pay income tax in Texas, that's why.
The state tax, right, state income tax.
And you don't pay sales tax on groceries or medicine. And it's still more expensive to live in Texas.
I was gonna say, does it balance out?
Unless you're poor. You talk about a socialist state. I grew up in Texas, but it's definitely a socialist state.
But don't you, so what, don't you have to vote on,
Not in Texas.
but
We do in
typically,
Oklahoma.
so how is it involuntary? Wouldn't it be considered voluntary?
Well, you're going to see that in a minute because it's involuntary because of the way they establish the levy.
Oh.
The levy's actually what gives them the variance that they need to override the vote of the people. So, exemptions? Well, if it's for public use, it's exempt. That's why I always insist that all the businesses I've ever started were for public good. Nursing homes are the ones that get made, and hospitals. They insist that they're for public good, and they receive subsidies, and they're flat out gold mines. Because of all because they don't pay tax. And I can take a good accountant and make any business non-profit. But that's why you hire an accountant. Method of assessment varies among jurisdictions. For example, a property market value or a percentage of a market value or replacement cost. I'll come back here. I just want to make sure it's still on the slides. Yeah, it is. I've got the YouTube open down here so I can glance down and see how it's doing. It's about a 10-second delay, so the slide keeps changing down here after these. It's causing me to think there's a ghost down here. Equalization is a process used to achieve uniformity. Another good socialist concept. You know, there's really only one thing left to do to make this a socialist nation.
What party?
Declare it a socialist nation. I mean, people ask me how I feel about universal health care. I say, well, I'm opposed to it, but I go to the VA. So I'm being a little hypocritical if I speak out too strongly against it. No, I have insurance. I go there to help with funding for the guys that don't have anything. But it's still, I'm supporting universal health care. It's almost impossible to be consistent politically in America. Equalization, I think I told you about Nichols Hills and the market values, assessment values.
They have some of the lowest in Oklahoma.
Actually, in Nichols Hills, the tax assessments are higher than the market values.
To pay for the lower end property.
Because there's a lot of low end property. But in that low end property, they use an equalization factor so that the owners of the low end property are not actually paying the same percentage against value that you are if you own those big estates. When we do the math on it, it'll really come to make sense for you. Right. Here's how we arrive at property taxes, or the rate anyway. First, the taxing body gets together and says, how much money do we want? Anybody ever work for the government? Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to single you out again, Brian. You had one of those good government jobs once, didn't you?
Yeah.
The taxing body says, how much money do we want? And anybody that's ever worked for a government body, I'm of course as close as I ever got was the military, knows at the end of the year, they run through and steal everything, because if we don't use the funds, we lose it out of our budget. So we want to make sure we use up every penny that was allocated to us last year, which means that the budget is always going to do what?
Go up.
Go up. Then once they've decided how much money they need, they decide how much they need specifically from real estate. In other words, what percentage of the budget are we going to fund with ad valorem taxes? And then we make what's called an appropriation. Now we want to be fair about it. You were supposed to laugh at that statement.
Sorry.
We want to be fair about it, so we're going to make sure that we appropriate it all out by using a levy. That's not what New Orleans didn't have good enough ones up when Katrina came through, but rather we're gonna have a tax levy against the properties. Varies from market to market, township to township, neighborhood to neighborhood.
Is that like a balance number or
It's
what does levy mean? It's probably the back of the book.
It's like a rate. It's like a rate, but it's not the rate. Because tax rate's different.
Right.
But it's a proportion. How much of this we're going to draw here? That's our. And then we come up with a tax rate for each taxing body, and we send a tax bill to you. And you say, oh, goody, 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 goody! I get to pay property taxes again this year.
Property taxes, now, they aren't property taxes and market value of houses, are they connected, you know, in some way?
Sure.
Okay, because I was in a meeting, a neighborhood meeting in a community where I have some houses, a couple of rental properties, and they have the city there, and they have a couple of different agencies there. And the treasurer, she said that over the last 5 years, their property values have consistently gone down each year, but in turn, the property taxes have gone up.
Need a new assessment.
Yeah.
We talk about the tax assessment.
Uh-huh.
What we're doing is we're taking, let's say we got $100,000 property. I'm just pulling numbers, okay? We got $100,000 legitimate market value. But we're going to have an assessed value for tax purposes of 85%. So for tax purposes, this property has a market value of what? 85,000. Now there'll rarely be 15% difference. I just do that to make it more obvious on the board. So now we're not going to do our tax levy or our mills against the 100,000. We're going to be doing it against 85,000. So if we got one mill, that's 1/1000s, and then we're going to be not figuring it by 100,000s, but 85,000s. Follow me? And that's and then we may even have, after an assessment, we may have an equalization factor, which works different. I used Nichols Hills already, but in Nichols Hills, your factor doesn't run off those average properties. Those would be at 100%. You could actually have an equalization factor of say 125%. There are some in the Nichols Hills area.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So now we assessed them 15% below actual market value, but now we do an equalization factor for part of the neighborhood. So now they're actually what, 10% above actual market value. Most of the time, your assessment will be below actual market value. But if you've got a descending market,
Yeah.
I almost said deteriorating neighborhood, but we really should use the word ascending or descending rather than the negative implication of deterioration. But if you've got a descending market, it's probably time to petition for a reassessment, especially if there's not been much selling.
Well, there's constant, new homes are going up like crazy in this neighborhood. But their property values are going down on these houses, and in conjunction, those property taxes are going up each year.
Yeah.
It's going the opposite way.
Yeah, now, you can petition for a reassessment of the area,
Uh-huh.
but it's a Peter Paul thing. What they'll do is they'll raise the levy because they still need to make the budget for the area. And when we do the math, I think there's even a slide tonight in this chapter on it. When we do the math, it I think falls together better because it's
Maybe they need to change their equalization factor more than anything, because then that would actually equal out the lower end properties tax rate, wouldn't it? So you said the new houses are coming in.
This is a weak illustration because not everybody in the room is going to be a car person. But back in the day, when we had carburetors and points and condensers and timing, we would have people that couldn't set a carburetor because they thought they were setting a carburetor. You never set a carburetor. You reset the points, you reset the timing, all of it had to be adjusted accordingly in order to get a top performing car. And the more high performance the car was, touchier it was. It's almost the same thing with taxes, okay? Property values are dropping, but unless expenses are dropping in that tax district, all that's going to happen is you can get it reassessed, but they're just going to raise the levy because they still need all these funds over here. And
So
then
it's not so much the worth of your property or the surrounding property, it's the tax burden.
There you go, right there. That's a very good way to say it, because it's not, we think in terms of the market value of our property, because that's what they assess against, but it's really, if you want to live in a district that has nice schools, you're gonna have to pay for the schools. We've actually got, I don't know what neighborhood you're talking about there.
It's right behind the OU Health Science Center.
Okay.
It's called the Drive.
That's the area of town I was going to with this illustration, because there's, over there by Douglas High School, bunch of new houses.
JFK.
Yeah.
Where's this at? What's it?
Yeah.
It's off of MLK, right across from Douglas High School.
I don't know what that is.
Let's just say 10th and MLK.
Yeah.
So over there by the Capitol and all of the
It's
health,
not that far.
Well, it's not.
Hospitals.
Yeah.
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 Anyway, you've got some nice new houses there, but you still have an area that is predominantly a bunch of older housing, lower value housing. Well, those newer houses are gonna get stuck pretty good because the levy is set, because you still got a big high school over there that has to be paid for. Still got streets that have to be paid for. When you get into the old town districts, the inner city districts of any community in Oklahoma anyway, you get in some of the eastern cities, west coast cities, it's a little different. But we have a lot of variance. We'll have, let's say, you'd swear there's no zoning commission in most of our towns, because you'll have nice new houses on this street, next street over. Now in Moore, it's called tornadoes that do that, but that area you're talking about there, you've got drastic difference in some houses.
Yeah, they have a $400,000 house next to a $30,000
Right,
house.
right.
And they're building more and more of those, and I see what's taking place, but there have a lot of buildings where have affordable housing, but I was like, where does this contemporary $400,000 3-story house come from,
Yeah.
But then they, so.
Well, yeah, there's some areas, I've done BPOs in there off of Lotus, and I get up there closer to the Capitol, and you get up in there and you've got some $15,000-$20,000 houses.
Yeah.
But you could go 10 blocks and you got brand new houses, but it's still in the same tax district. And it's got put very well there. It's not so much the value of your property when we're talking taxes. That just happens to be the index that we use to determine what we're going to collect, but we still got to collect the budget.
Has anybody seen that really pretty modern glass and concrete house on Lincoln before the Capitol?
It's been down there, I probably have.
It's on the corner, like literally on the corner. And there's a bunch of historical homes, but the house on the corner is a modern one. It's all glass and concrete. It's so cool.
You did that for me.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking. I like
It's
this
on
side.
the east side of the road.
Take
Yeah.
it personal.
I love that house, but it like
Never would
doesn't
do
fit
that.
that neighborhood, because all the houses next to it are Victorian and.
Well, it'll
I know
start
you're
because they're building those kind of houses all through.
Did you get enough of them?
Well, that one's been there a long time.
Yeah.
All right, the tax bill sent to each after the rates determined. Again, when we come back and do the math, we'll review this, and it will have rolled around your head subliminally a little bit. It has a due date on it that's set by statute. Sometimes, I don't know whether they still do or not, I haven't seen any in a while, they'll give you a discount for paying it early. My mother-in-law was asking me a while back when they stopped doing that.
Giving a discount if you pay early?
I told her, and I wish I had your statement, because the neighborhood that she's in Amarillo is right just south and east of the old Amarillo Country Club. At one time, it was Snob Hill. Well, that was a long time ago. Now it's a bunch of old deteriorating houses, and the values of them have dropped. But they didn't raise necessarily the assessment on it. but they did quit giving discounts for paying it early. Used to, they give them a discount for paying it 6 months early, so they just quit doing it. That raised more money. Kind of like that. But it's been stated that it's about making the budget. Enforcement. Before it can be enforced, the tax must be valid. Fees are generally collected when you sell the property. Taxes collected annually. But they have to be a valid tax. So in Oklahoma, it's going to have to be voted on by the people at some point. And then, of course, the jurisdiction will have their process or provisions for delinquent taxes. If you don't pay them, well, first they're going to publish it in the newspaper. So-and-so's a terrible neighbor. They don't pay their taxes. Let them go far enough behind, they're going to sell your property for tax, to satisfy the taxes. By the way, don't sit around waiting to buy bargains on tax sales. There rarely are any. Usually if they are, they're in a neighborhood that there's a reason why people quit paying the taxes on. I have actually told people before, I said, I'm not encouraging you to do this, but the best thing for you to do is quit paying the taxes on it and walk away from it. Eventually the city's going to have to take it back and take care of it because there's going to be taxes owed against it. The process is going to require them to take it back unless somebody buys it. But some areas, the property can get to the point where it's not worth what's owed against it in taxes. And of course, the government's good at paying penalties, or charging penalties. I've never understood in taxes why if you keep trying to pay your taxes, then they assess interest and penalties. But if you just quit, there's a point at which the penalties and the interest stops, because the laws only allows them to charge so much. And so in some cases, if you're behind the 8 ball, you're better off quit paying them, because penalties will stop. Right of redemption.
It's interesting that they use real estate to satisfy all kinds of stuff that people really try to fall, they end up falling behind on, like, taxes or liens for like loans or mechanical liens or anything like that. It has to be done before you do anything with your home.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I didn't know that was the case for.
Real estate is probably, if you don't
like the
have,
justifier.
if you don't have an income tax, real estate's your next biggest source of taxation.
Yeah.
And in the states that have both, it equalizes out a little more. I actually favor the concept of a state income tax, which theoretically should produce lower tax bills, but I think it's fairer than just throwing everything on the ad valorem taxes, because then you're just throwing the taxation on people who have worked hard to get ahead, rather than the people that are the migrants and just rent and whatnot. Equitable right of redemption, statutory right of redemption. General rule of thumb, equitable means you got equity in it. If you're going to redeem it, most equitable rights of redemption are before foreclosure, before the sale. Statutory, we'll say, it says you've got 72 hours after the sheriff's sale to redeem it. When we do storage room lockup sales, every state that I've done those in or own properties in, the individual has up to the time that the auctioneer says sold to redeem the property. That's statutory. Well, I mean, that's an equitable right of redemption, because they own it, they got the right up until it's sold to say, I'll pay the bill. In storage, I don't own any over there, but in the storage business in Texas,
they've got 48 hours after the auctioneer says sold. And that's true in several other states too. Now, I know on the Storage Wars program, they didn't show that little bit of razzle dazzle. But that's statutory, because after we've sold it, you no longer have equity in it. It belongs to somebody else. But if the lawmakers say, no, we're gonna give them another 48 hours, well, there you go. That's statutory. Special assessments, local improvement district taxes, annual bills are typically spread out over a number of years, having the right to prepay at any time without penalty. So go back to gated communities, city agrees to put the new infrastructure, new water mains in there. They spread it out over a number of years, but if you want to go in and pay your assessment all at once, there's no penalty on it. There are some taxes you can't prepay, by the way. They'll charge you a penalty for prepaying.
No taxes like that.
Well, it could be sales taxes, it could be an income tax, it's just gonna be according to jurisdiction. Why would a taxing body charge a prepayment penalty?
Because they want to make the interest.
Well, they're really not making any interest because they don't have the money yet.
You may be waiting for for time to justify like
I figured Scott was gonna answer it readily after his other observation.
Has to do with the budget.
Has to do with the budget. You know, in other words, if you let them prepay, we may spend all this money before we need to. You know, I have a low catharsis I go through every year about tax time, as people say. I'm getting back $2,000 on my income tax. Well, that means that you loan the government $2,000 interest-free. You are an enabler. You enabled the government to think they had money they didn't have, and that $2,000 you're getting back, they spent $4,000. And then they had to borrow the 2 plus 2 more, so you enable them. I always feel like a failure if I don't. Now I'm self-employed, I've been self-employed most of my adult life. I always felt like a failure if I ever got anything back. That meant that somehow I loaned them money interest-free, and I just don't like doing that. Well, it's a savings account. Well, then put it in a savings account and draw interest on it. Don't loan it to a bad debtor. You know, I mean, that's what you. If you got a brother-in-law that drinks like a fish, you gonna loan him money to go out on Friday night? You know, doesn't pay it back, doesn't get to his job on Monday. That's what you're doing with the government when you. But some taxing bodies recognize the problem there, and in some taxing bodies they have rules that does not allow money to roll over. We have some of that inside our real estate commission. Some of our funds stay with us. Some of them, if they're not spent, roll over into the general operating fund of the state of Oklahoma. So, you know, you don't want to fill the coffers up too much to be given away when you might need it next year. Aaliyah, local improvement district. That's a test question, by the way. You're never going to see one of them. May be created to fund large-scale improvement projects. That used to be called urban renewal. But there's a question in the question bank, that's what a lid is. It's not something you put on top of the jar, but it is, but not for test purposes. Other liens on real property. Boy, this looks like a repeat of stuff we already talked about a few minutes ago, doesn't it? Voluntary specific, mortgages, tax. A mortgage is a voluntary specific loan. I see what it did. I gave you the examples a while ago when it came up, and now they're going to give you the examples. They should have got on the ball with me back when I was doing this a while ago. They shouldn't have.
But in the system.
Mechanics liens. You hire a carpenter to do the work, you don't pay him, guess what? you slap a lien on
I used to know a nasty dude that would go and work on properties and work out some way of still getting a mechanics lien on the person's property and end up taking over the property. He was a real dirty dude that worked out of Norman. I couldn't believe it, man. He tried to do it to me, and that's how I learned about all his dirty
it.
business.
Learned how you did it.
Yeah, it's nuts, man. Like, he literally was able to take over people's properties from a mechanics lien, and it takes precedence over any other lien on property here in Oklahoma, apparently. It's the way it worked for him. He was able to get his lien ratified before anything else.
I don't know how you did that.
Probably had a good lawyer, though, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how you
It was
did that.
wild, dude. Like, he almost took my house, dude. It was nuts.
Mechanics liens come behind, behind mortgages, mortgages become behind taxes. You know, judgments come ahead of mechanics liens unless they filed, unless the mechanics got the judgment. But all a mechanics lien really does is says if there's anything there after it's all said and done, yeah, you might get paid.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
They're not gonna be able to sell the property with that. I had a client that had built a building over here in the Shadow Lake, office park over here on Penn. He didn't build it according to the specs that were required for in there. He didn't maintain it accordingly, and he refused to pay the homeowners association fee because that's set up as a condominium association in there, even though it is a business park. And when I listed the property, the homeowners, the association president called me, who happens to be an attorney that has his office in there, and he said, "Are you aware that there's over $10,000 in association dues against that we have liens against on it?" And I said, "No, it wasn't." I said, "I'll talk to him about it." He said, "I refuse to pay it." I said, "You want any choice? Sell the property because you don't owe money on it. Your taxes are all paid, and there's no other liens. It's the only lien on it. You sell that property, that's going to be paid." Guess what he chose to do?
Not so.
Yeah, that was 5 years ago, and he still owns that property. He said, "No, I'm not paying it. I'll just keep that bill." I see him occasionally. I say, "Well, still draining you?" "Yep." Because it was a martial arts facility, so I mean, and the way it's built, it's just a big old room, and it doesn't function well for anything else. So it sits vacant most of the time, so it's costing me money. I could sell it for him tomorrow, but
There was
the,
some, so I used to be a roofing contractor, and to put a mechanics lien on a customer's home, you had to do it before the service, and you had to pay a fee, so it was,
you had to do it before the service. Yeah.
is that how it
No.
is here?
No, in Oklahoma it's done after completion, but and
And don't they have a certain amount of time they have to say that I don't take responsibility for this work? That they have to file like a certain deal, and then,
that I don't know about.
yeah, because if you don't file it, then that mechanics lien can still stay and be ratified if you haven't filed some kind of deal. I forget what they call it. But yeah, you have to write.
They are not as easy to file as people are led to believe.
Really?
No. Because you've got, in Oklahoma, you've got to prove first there was a contract.
Even verbal.
Well, verbal's not enforceable, so a verbal contract is meaningless in filing a mechanics lien. So you're gonna have to have a written contract with instructions and stipulations and dates and the whole bit. And if there's, and it can't even get as sticky that if the phrase time is of the essence is not in there, then the dates mean nothing. I disagree with that, but that is what the judge will tell you. So, there's even gonna have to be a stipulation in there in your contract that says you have to pay within so many days. So, now, was that true in Arizona too, where you had to file it? You went down and filed, now, you know,
That's why most contractors wouldn't do it, because if they paid you, then it was a waste of time.
then you had to go back and get
It
it.
was a waste of your funds, because you had to pay for that lien. So the only time they would recommend doing it would be if you were worried about the customer or not.
If you're on self-pay in the medical world, now, that's what they do, is, they file a lien against you before you're ever released from the hospital. I found that out this last
that right?
motorcycle wreck.
You know, getting a mechanic's lien on a car too is just as a major pain in the butt process.
Yeah, it's actually on cars, it's actually to hold the car and get Title 42 and it is get a mechanic's lien.
Well, I just did one because I have a little 2016 Nissan Versa sitting in my backyard. He refuses to come get it.
Yeah, and, so it's not the walk in the park that people think it is. But a mechanic's lien gives security to those performing the labor. If you don't pay them, they put a lien on it. That means that 20 years from now when they sell it, if you kept renewing that lien, because most of them are only for a specific period of time, then you have the possibility of collecting if there's any money left after everything else paid off. And that includes our commission too, by the way. Our commission comes out ahead of everything. It comes out ahead even of mortgage and taxes. So, however, if the mortgage isn't satisfied, we're not going to have a closing. So, and there must be a contract. This is, of course, expressed or implied, but in most states, you're going to have a tough time getting that lien filed if you don't have a written contract, because they're not enforceable. You know how you enforce a verbal contract?
Record it.
Recorded on a one-way recording state, that's exactly what I remember him saying.
No.
Yeah.
$50. I know some boys down in the southeast part of the state. That's how most verbal contracts are enforced. It's whoever's big enough and run the biggest blood.
Is it $50 a knee or is it?
No, these redneck boys do it. That's easier than cutting pulpwood, you know. It's just Saturday night entertainment for them. I've used that for years. Somebody told me in the last pre-license that was from down around Haleyville, and they said, I think that price has gone up to about $100. And I said, well, that's still a bargain. I said, that's gonna make it look like an accident, even for $100? She's one of our agents now. I'll be nice to those people now. I talked down to Durant this week, and it's a different world. You get down in that part of the state. They operate with a different set of values. So depending on the jurisdiction, lien priority can be established. This is talking about mechanics liens. It's date the construction begins, date is completed, date the individual subcontractors commence or completed. It's all, you know, it varies according to jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I was up in South Dakota. When I went there to reopen the church, I had this notion that I was going to do it in the trades. And I got up there, and it was in February, and I saw them roofing a house. And I said, can't roof a house in this weather. It's below zero. The shingles never sealed. Well, snow fell on them, held them down until spring. I said, I believe I better go back to selling on a car lot, because I don't believe I know how to build it in this cold country. And that's what I did.
Wouldn't they use a blowtorch or something like that? They broke the end of one of those big torches to try to get it set?
There wasn't a common practice, but you'd see it every now and then. They just put them on there and let the snow hold them down to the ground. But,
They wouldn't move.
yeah, sometimes they had to brush the snow off, put the new shingles on. Hated that country.
Problem I had is those asphalt shingles get brittle, and you use a nail gun, they'll just, when you shoot the nail, it
Split.
breaks it, and then it won't hold.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I asked them. I said, they told me, they said, oh, I can spring they'll seal. And I said, by spring they'll be so brittle they won't seal. But they seal. Like I say, I just came to the conclusion I didn't have a clue how to build that in that country.
Some states contract, lien notice is recorded. Suffice it to say, it's gonna vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And the book says that some states it may be given priority over previously reported liens except for taxes and special assessments, and I'm sure that's true. I never filed one because I got friends in Southeast Oklahoma. Yeah, but and it's already been observed about real estate law. Remember that the laws are written to give people a fighting chance. So, when you're talking about foreclosures and evictions and mechanics liens and whatnot, the laws are there basically to slow everything down in the hopes that we can get everything reconciled. Now, they don't normally get applied that way, but that's the philosophy behind it, is let's slow everything down and talk it out. And really, quite honestly, I know it sounds harsh to say, but it is the way we used to operate in this country. I'd rather an old boy come to me even if we have to go to Fish City and let's work it out before we just go to the courthouse and start filing papers. And, let's come to an agreement, and then go drink a beer together and move on. This business of filing liens and judgments and making attorneys rich has never been in my playbook. So
That's how I feel about our renters. We have a lease, but if you come to me and tell me you can't pay your rent, then move out. Like that,
Yeah,
right now.
don't just sit there and squat, bro.
Yeah.
I hear you, man. God,
I'll help you
something
move
else.
out, I don't care about the lease at that point. Let's just get out so I can get somebody that
They
can.
won't do it, bro. They won't do it.
Well,
It's hard to find good people. Even your friends.
yeah.
Obviously, if they can't pay their rent, if you take them to court over the lease, you know what I mean? They're not gonna have the money to pay that.
We, in the storage business, we have people who know they're not gonna be able to pay their storage bills, so they'll come in and move everything out and leave a box of rags in the room with a lock on it. Now, we're tied up for 90 days.
Damn.
Because of a box?
Yeah, because there's personal property in there. So we have to go through the process, which takes about 90 days before we can put a lock on it right after the rent's due, but it takes about 90 days before we get everything filed where we can sell a box of rags, which nobody's gonna bid on, so I'm gonna bid $1 on it so that I can free up the room. Why not just move out? If the room's empty and there's no lock on it, I don't have to worry. I just put it up for rent again. But if they leave their lock on it and something in it, we've got to go through the entire process. I think when people get in trouble, it's the defense mechanism. It can't be my fault. It has to be somebody else's fault. So I'll just make everybody as miserable as I am. So,
And it's me against the world.
which my personality is such, if they come to me and tell me their situation, I'd let them move out and probably buy them a bag of groceries and send them on their way with a good luck. But when they start pulling that stunt, well, we're in another ballgame. Then I'm probably going to go ahead and, while I'm filing the paperwork, I'm going to go ahead and file for a judgment. And when you're filing for a judgment for rent, you just wasted your filing fee. Oh, look at there, judgment liens. I said judgment on purpose because I knew it was the next slide. Judgment's a decree issued by a court saying you owe it.
Involuntary equivalent general.
It's its priority according to the laws of the state which property, real or personal, is located. So they don't have any money to pay their rent. We'll just get a judgment against them.
They don't show up.
And now, you got a piece of paper that says if these people ever get any money, and you find out about it because they tell you, because you can't stop them, you might get a little of it. So,
I heard about this one guy that, with his properties, he pays them just $200 to go ahead and move, because it's gonna cost $200 to file all the paperwork. And he says $200 to move out and everything, he said, and it's been working for him.
it probably saves him a lot.
Yeah, he saves him a lot of money just by paying them $200
Yeah.
to move out.
It's not a bad idea, I never thought of it, it's not a bad idea.
Because it's gonna cost you $200.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna cost you, more than that if you get in a battle with them. But judgment liens are involuntary, equitable, general liens issued by the court, priority determined by state law. Number 3 is a test question, they're enforced by writ of execution. All liens are enforced by writ of execution. Sounds like the governor's gonna put you in the chair, don't it?
That's a type of filing though?
It's a piece of paper.
Yeah.
It says writ of execution across the top of it. And a writ of execution can stop the sale of the property because there's a lien against it. And unless there's equity there to pay that lien off, you're dead in the water. Unless the seller has some money. Well, if they had money, they wouldn't have all these unpaid bills. I probably ought to use this. I like Jeff Foxworthy talking about getting the car repossessed. You heard him do that one? Says they came to him and said, well, Mr. Foxworthy, we're here to pick up your car because you didn't make the payments. He said, well, I didn't make the payments because I don't have any money. He said, well, could you bring the payments up to date? Could you make one payment? He said, I still don't have any money. He said, can you write a check? He said, oh, you can take a check? I'll just pay that sucker off. I thought you wanted money. When the property is sold, the satisfaction of the judgment has to be filed. Which is part of what Scott was talking about there. You have to file the lien ahead of time, and then you finish the work, you gotta file a release on it, or in Oklahoma, we use the satisfaction.
So
Less
that's
pendants, that's a
list.
test question, litigation pending. It's an encumbrance that is a notice of a possible future lien on real estate.
I guess there's a form for that.
I'm sure there is. Our only real involvement in less pendants is generally when a would-be investor comes and says, can you tell me what's in pre-foreclosure? Well, pre-foreclosure is actually not an official term, it's a slang term. And what you do is go to the legal notice and look for the less pendings of
Right.
properties.
Right, I've heard
And
about that.
most of the time, that means they're getting close to going into foreclosure. They've been making the payments, so the lender has filed paperwork saying we're gonna move towards foreclosure. They file less pendings, which keeps the people from selling the property without their permission. And generally, when you're working with a property that's gonna be sold short sale, it's already got a less pendings against it. Yeah, not a bad idea. I know that I do it now. We didn't used to do it because it was harder to do. You had to actually go to the courthouse and look them up. But now we have a program that with our MLS that records if there is litigation pending on the property, it shows up on Realist. So makes it a little easier. Attachments. Court retains public custody of the property until the lawsuit's concluded. So they're going to attach the property. Most of the time when that takes place, we're out of the picture. Once the courts take possession of property, goes into receivership, our listings are canceled, contracts are canceled, and we're out of the picture. Not so much with the less pendants.
There's a fine line between those two, huh?
There was a,
Is that what a lot of people?
I hesitate to say what I'm gonna say, cause I don't wanna look as stupid as I really am, but, and one of you in the room may get this wild here and do it, I made some good money doing it. At one point in my career, I decided I'd just be a short sale specialist, because there was enough foreclosures during the recession. And so I watched for the less pendants, and I called on the people, and then I'd call the mortgage companies and work a deal with them, and nobody else wanted to do it at the time. And then somebody wrote a book on how to do it, and reality television talked about how there's billions and billions of dollars in it. So I let somebody else make those billions, because I obviously was doing it wrong, because I wasn't making those billions.
Were you doing it as a fee for service kind of thing, or were you actually short selling the property to somebody else and going through the process?
I was listing them just like normal listings, except that they had to be sold at short sale. And it's a paperwork thing, and I hate paperwork, but hey, the market's flat, you do what you have to do.
Pick up the volume.
States and inheritance tax. Involuntary statutory general lien. That's the tax you pay because grandma loves you.
On the test, is he gonna have like a, it's gonna say what type of tax, and then we're gonna have to decide which of the, like, is it involuntary, is it statutory, you know what I'm saying? Like, are we gonna have to be able to label those for each type of tax, or no?
No, the question on inheritance tax tells you the percentage the inheritance tax is, how old the deceased was, and how old the inheritor is, and all other stipulations, and then you have to figure the tax.
Oh, okay, so that's easy.
Something you'll never do.
Right.
We like to test you over stuff you'll never do.
Is there a reason for that?
Sure. I just don't know what it is. And we will, when we practice the math, we'll show you the formula anyway. Big thing on the math question is just read the question carefully. And only concentrate on the figures that are important, because there'll always be half a dozen figures or so that don't mean anything. My disagreements, and when I was on the committee, I disagreed with having any questions on it about state taxes, because it's such a political hot button and has been for, seems like forever, that we don't ever really have a clue what the law's going to say. Because it can change too easily. Like I said, I didn't like the question that, because we could be testing over the last revision to the law, or 2 revisions back. So, but the questions in there gives the percentages, and that's what we compromised on for those of us that were opposed, wanted to take it out of the test bank, but instead of saying according to present law. Some of them wanted to make it a state-specific one. Well, it's not a state-specific question, it's a federal tax thing, so covered. Utility liens, involuntary, equitable, specific. If you don't pay the utilities at your house, what do? Turn them on.
Yeah.
We got a letter. Anybody else live in Moore?
Yeah.
Did you get that letter from the city?
I hadn't seen one.
Maybe it's been in our utility bill. It may not have been a special letter. That it was a special note. It was in with the utility bill. So probably most people never read it, because they just throw that stuff.
Paperless.
Yeah, if the paperless, it's probably online, but you.
Yeah, in an email or something, that was it.
Anyway, it says they're nice people now. They'll give you a call the day before they shut your utilities off.
Oh,
That's big of them.
Make sure your phone number's up to date.
Yeah, that was my first thought too. Oh, so they're confirming your phone number is what they're doing for collection purposes. Well, the irony of that is because since it's a public utility debt, they have to be able to show that they have been attempting to collect it. And that's the purpose of the call. The purpose is not because they're nice people. The purpose is to show they they can show recorded that they have made an attempt to collect the debt, which extends the statute of limitations on collecting it. So, I bet you they'll call you again too. Bail bond liens. Have you ever had one of these? Yeah, I already told you my trick, so you know.
I've had a bell on, I just never had one.
Bail bond liens are actually classified as a voluntary lien. You didn't have to break the law. And that's the way the statute's written. So, and since they are a voluntary lien, that makes for some shortcuts for the bail bondsman to collect them too. So, which is going to keep what you put up to purchase it, but, franchise taxes. Primary purpose for incorporating the real estate business is, of course, liability. And I used to say you didn't need to worry about it until your annual income in real estate got above $50,000, but that's really not true anymore. One of the firms you ought to do when you start selling real estate is form an LLC. Get paid through that, so that because we do have a high risk of liability in this industry. So, especially if you've got other investments, even if it's just your homestead, the LLC protects you from lawsuits.
Well, we were having a conversation on the way home last night, and she was informing me about, you know, you can't have an opinion, or you can't give your opinion. I was like, well, that might be a problem for me.
It's a problem for a lot of realtors, but that is,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, that's how I state it, but it's not how the code of rules states it. But we don't deal in our opinion. We deal in market assessment, market conditions, and we deal in facts, not opinion. That's the best way to protect yourself from liability.
Yeah.
They don't care what your opinion is anyway.
It's just $100 to file for a LLC now, right, at the Secretary of
Is that
State?
right now?
Yeah, it's $100 and it's $25 a year to
It's still 25.
Ah.
It's 25.
I don't
to
think there's no renewal.
renew it, yeah.
No, I just
Every
renewed-
year you have to renew it, promise.
Well, yeah, it's 25. It's $25.
Oh,
per year.
LLCs,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
$100 to sign up for it,
That's
isn't it?
close,
No, it's 25.
It's only 25? Okay, I thought it was 100 for some reason.
but I don't know, count takes.
That's a freaking deal, dude. That's kinda cool, I didn't realize, I've been telling people about it and it's only.
All you gotta do is fill out a form, carry it in there, and hand it to them.
Yeah, it's a one-page form.
IRS,
Huh.
income tax liens, involuntary statutory general liens. I got notice a couple months ago that I had two released, two tax liens.
Oh, good for you. Do you have a letter?
Don't have any now.
Smoky?
And that was paid off several years ago. But,
Takes them a while to get through.
they filed the same lien twice,
Oh.
which, I'd forgotten they did that, and I only requested once that it be released after
Oh,
it
wow.
was paid. So it was only released once.
What a crap deal.
So even though the IRS is the ones that screwed up, I had to cover their screw up. And then my accountant's one spotted it, and,
Good old
I said, well, we gotta do it, we're gonna have to request to release it again. So he just actually retyped the letter that we sent the first time, and I signed it, redated it.
That's what you think. I'll be.
The IRS would be dangerous if they were crooked,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not only crooked, they're incompetent. And that makes them really dangerous. It's, anybody that's ever had to deal with them knows that. They're, you know, I went in there on that one day when I was at, and I reached in my briefcase, took out one of these, put it there, and the agent that was assigned to my case said, "What's that?" He said, "It's a calculator." She said, "It's not like any calculator I've ever seen."
What?
I said, "That's a business calculator." bankers using figure interest. So what I'm fixing to do is to, the settlement we're talking about, I'm fixing to calculate it out, see if this is in my best interest to accept this settlement. And she said, well, you're not using that in here.
Hard, man.
So I walked to the door, I put it back in my briefcase, I walked over to the door and opened it up, and I said, is there anybody in this room can pass a basic math exam? Because my agent can't.
He told me to do it.
My attorney was about to die, she's sitting there about to die laughing, but she'd been their counsel for 28 years, I think she said, before she retired from the IRS. But she said they're getting stupider and stupider. And this has been 6-7 years ago. So if they're getting stupider and stupider, they're good. Guy went in there one day, and that poor guy, he weighed 500 pounds if he weighed an ounce, sitting on that poor stool. I felt sorry for that stool. And but he had beautiful hair. He looked like he just came from the beauty shop. Wearing it just like my grandma used to wear, about the same color. And he was looking in the mirror, kind of fixing it.
Go weigh 500 now.
And he called my name as him. I said, I'll wait till the next person. And they said, asked me why, and I said, because if I have to talk to him, it ain't going to be pretty. So he got a problem. He needs to be in a bigger city than Oklahoma City. But suffice it to say, you owe Uncle Scam money, you ain't buying real estate.
Uncle Scam wants you?
At least not in your name.
No.
God, gee whiz.
Really?
All right, you have a choice now.
Yep.
We can go home early, or we can do something difficult.
Let's do something difficult.
I mean, really difficult. Really difficult.
Right.
I'm trying to influence your decision.
Let's go home early, bro. Let's go.
It's Thursday. Let's
Yeah,
go.
hell yeah, let's go. Love it. Best teacher I've had ever. Period.
Thanks, guys. See you Monday.
Alright, hey, you guys, I
Or
will not be
Tuesday.
here next week.
Excuse
Hey,
me.
man, have fun travels and
And if you're a praying person, I hate airplanes, so say a prayer.
I'll work with you.
I'm
Enjoy your
gonna
travel.
pray
I
against
God
hijacks
said
of
extra
Cuba.
yesterday.
Well, she wasn't being specific. She said, you know, we can pray whatever we want. I'm gonna pray for hijackers.
Whoa! So,
I
he's
didn't
the
say-
preacher. He's the
I
preacher.
didn't say I was gonna pray for a flame out.
You're just
Tuesday.
gonna cause me to not get on that plane.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate the class.
You heard about that Aggie that was in the airplane and
No.
it lost one engine, and the pilot came back and said, well, we've lost one engine, but don't worry about it, we have 3 more, we should be fine, we're just gonna be a little late. But later he came back and said, we've lost another engine, but don't worry about it, we're just gonna be a little late. The 3rd engine, they called in and said, we've lost our 3rd engine, and we're gonna be a little late, and I know this joke here. And finally called back and said, folks, I've got some bad news. We've lost the 4 engine. This old wagon stood up and said, now we'll be up here all day. He was no SU grad, so.
Texas A&M grad?
Or an A&M
I was about to say.
I think the last time I told him he was an A&M.
My dad's UT, so he tells Aggie jokes all the time.
We in high school, we had a football coach who was an A&M graduate, and there was this joke going around about the A&M rabbit hunt, where they circled the rabbit and shot it. And we'd tell that joke, and he wouldn't laugh. Finally one day he said, Coach, man, it's just a joke. Why won't you laugh? And he said he was really happy. And I was there. And so several guys got shot. They were hunting rabbit and didn't realize they'd surrounded the rabbit. It wasn't done intentionally.
They really got shot.
And several of them got shot.
Oh, my.
So he didn't think the joke was all that funny.
Oh, man, that's terrible. All right.
See you next week, sir. Thank you for the class.
I'll be here.
I sure
Remember, we don't have class Monday.
Yes, sir.
I won't be here Thursday because of my family reunion. I just thought I'd let you know.
Well, I should, if this is working, I should have them where you can watch them later.
We'll watch them on the way down.
Or watch them on the way down if you got enough data on your phone. Of course, once they're on YouTube, they don't use up much data.
All right, let me know.
YouTube.